Join us on a journey where we unravel the latest trends, tackle your burning questions, and explore innovative strategies that are shaping the future of compensation, all with a cup of coffee in hand.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Comp and Coffee, where we dig into the conversations that matter most in the world of compensation, HR, and rewards. I'm your host, Ruth Thomas, and today we're getting honest about the growing tension in today's pay strategies. And we're breaking down the numbers and looking at some of the pressure points behind data from our 2025 Compensation Best Practice Report, from budget battles to transparency gaps to the reality that many employees no longer believe that their pay is fair. And I have two wonderful guests joining me today to share their insights and discuss some of the metrics that we're going to be talking through today. First of all, I am going to introduce Paul Wolf, who is Human First Leadership Advocate and author of the book Human Beings First, and also a PayScale board member. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Lexi. Thanks for having me, letting me squirm in on your little podcast here. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. And welcoming back podcast repeat visitor, Lexi Clark, Chief People Officer here at PayScale. Welcome back, Lexi.
I am happy for you to have me again, Ruth. Every time you have me, I feel like I got re-invited back and I didn't screw it up the last time. So happy to be here.
It's always a good sign. That's always
maybe not be as emotional as we were on the last episode. It all got a bit got a bit emotional last time.
Yeah,
so
it was great. Yeah. It was great.
But Paul, first visit to us here on Comp and Coffee in the audience. Do you want to just tell them about how you ended up on the PayScale board, a bit about your background, and why I'm very happy to have you here to join the conversation today?
Absolutely. So I was a CHRO or HR executive for about 20-ish years. As I get older, the number gets longer at companies like Match.com, Condé Nast. And my last corporate gig was Indeed, the job search engine, for almost 8 years, and helping them grow from 1,000 people to 12,000 people globally and during the pandemic. Decided to leave corporate America. I wrote my book, Human Beings First, Practices for Empathetic and Expressive Leadership, and that came out in March of 23. Kind of working on a second edition right now, but I have fits and starts. The writing process is a little challenging for me. Was lucky enough to join the PayScale board in May of 22. Got to meet Ruth and Lexi at that time, and I adore both of them. I think PayScale is in a place today with AI and the way you all are embracing AI and thinking about your products to make the pay conversation easier, make compensation easier for your clients. So I'm a huge fan and advocate. And I do some project work and advisory work and just things that pop up here or there. I just like to help make things better for people. And I'm thrilled to join the two of you.
Well, welcome, Paul. This is a conversation we've been trying to get together for a while, so I'm really excited. We were all together in San Francisco in person about 4 weeks ago, but I'm glad we've managed to schedule this now. So we're going to talk about some of the conflict that we're seeing around compensation and around the employer and employee relationship. We're going to center that around some of the key stats from our Compensation Best Practice Report, which is our big annual survey that we do with HR and compensation practitioners. It comes out at the beginning of the year. The theme of this year's report was the tension in that relationship. So let's kind of delve into that, and interested to hear your views and why you think that's playing out. So one of the first stats I'm going to start with is why compensation feels harder than ever today for business leaders, HR pros, and compensation managers. We saw the striking stat that 44% of organizations say compensation is more challenging in 2025. And for the second year running, we saw that compensation was the highest rated challenge, ahead of recruitment, retention, and engagement. So it had never been top. It made top last year. It made top this year. So Lexi, let's start off with you. Why do you think people are finding it so hard to manage compensation?
Yeah, I think there's a few different pieces here. The last few years, are we still saying unprecedented times anymore? If they're all precedented, or maybe unprecedented is precedented, whatever. But I think that the last few years have been more challenging than ever for HR leaders. And that is on the really positive note, because HR was looked at to help weather all of the storms of the last few years. So whether that was COVID and what does it mean to be remote? What does it mean to return to an office? Do we return to an office? Any of those pieces, whether it was, pay transparency legislation, whether it was all of the transparency just around compensation in general, all over social media, like that role, I think, has been looked to be more strategic and a more strategic voice than ever. What is really challenging about that is that the role has shifted a lot, but one of the things I think the three of us have actually talked about a lot is there's not a lot of resourcing for those HR leaders or teams to figure out how to navigate that. They are being looked to become, true, I think, kind of business experts. And this is a time and a moment I think all of us have waited for in this function for a long time. But there has not been a whole lot of like, how do we get there? All of that to say, I think what that means is that, you've got the pressure that's coming from those roles and those teams being looked to for advice and strategic support and kind of more and different work than ever. You've got, the lack of, I think, kind of resourcing and training, but you've also got these rising expectations from employees because of the pay transparency legislation, because pay data is everywhere. And you can go on Twitter or, anywhere to go and find these, enormous threads around kind of different job ranges, what people are actually making within their own job, any of those pieces. And the reality of the market the last few years is it has not been predictable. And so budgets are limited. So all of those different factors are colliding all at once and at one time. And the question is, how do you think about compensation? And like, what does that mean? And oh, by the way, like, there's compensation, but there's also this idea of total rewards. And the shift that has happened thematically that, one size fits all is one size fits none at this point. And so, all of those different pieces, I think, are coming together all at one time. And, with that means the teams are having to answer to executives, they're having to answer to leaders, they're having to answer to employees, and they're having to balance the reality of where budgets are sitting and the limitations on what budgets look like with all of those different dynamics and factors. And so I think that makes it probably a harder time than ever, to navigate a lot of these different pieces. So that's my take. Paul, I would be curious kind of what your thoughts on that are as well. But I think it's, all of these things are happening all at once. And the positive side of that is that it's great. And, we're getting more seats at the table. The bad side of that is pretty much everything that I just said. And the hard, maybe not bad. We can debate the terminology.
No, I agree. I agree with all that. I think the couple things I would add to that are you've got 5 generations in the workforce now. Younger generations, and I think we all want the same thing. I think the younger generations, the folks that are younger than I am, are more vocal about what they're looking for, which I think is an amazing thing. At first when we had 5 generations, it's like, oh, the younger generations want to work someplace that does social good. Well, I want to work someplace that does some good. I get companies are in business to make money, but like that does some good. And pay scale helping get compensation right. And indeed, it was helping people get jobs. Like those are things that resonated with me as being, I'm an older person in the workforce. But so I don't think that's a bad thing. I think the younger generations and the younger employees we have pushing for transparency across the board is a really, really good thing. I think you couple that with companies now are being forced to embrace pay transparency because some of the laws that are being passed, whether they be the state laws here in the U.S., European Union laws, APAC, wherever you are, this is it's interesting, especially here in the States. I thought since we changed administrations, we would see a slowdown of this, and we haven't, which I think is a good thing. So you've got that, and then these companies are being forced to do this. I think some companies don't truly understand or acknowledge the fact that there's a lot of infrastructure work that goes into pay transparency. And unless you're a tiny little company doing it from, the beginning, like trying to do that is a very long, meaty project. Like when at Indeed, we went and did pay transparency I think we launched it in June of 2018 or 19. I think I've blocked the date from my mind. But it was like a year-long project. And that was like with a ton of resources. And the comment about resourcing is an interesting one because you're right. what I'm seeing when I talk to CHROs and CFOs in the US, at least, is that CFOs are being a little squirrely with money. I think doing the right thing because they're not sure about what's going to happen longer term with the economy. And so you're getting squeezed there. I think you've got employees looking for transparency. And then you have, and this is one thing we went through when I was at Indeed, was you've got the managers who get freaked out about pay transparency. And I know that both of you have heard me talk about this before, because they have been very opaque about what they're doing and how they're making decisions with employees. And a lot of people are hearing, you're a rock star, but finance and HR only gave me a 3% budget, so I can only give you 2% because I've got to do these other things. That isn't always the truth. It's up to the manager in most companies to decide how they distribute that money. Therein lies a whole nother issue with pay equity, but you're letting a human make decisions. It's not HR dictating what people get. And I think some managers, because these conversations are hard, like as human beings, the vast majority of us don't want to upset somebody else, or we don't want to make enemies. We just kind of want to make it through life and have a wonderful life and a good time and friends, and don't want to piss people off. There are the handfuls that, that's a whole nother podcast. We can talk about the handful that want to piss people off all the time, but you don't want to do this. And so these conversations, just like performance conversations, are difficult because I think a lot of times leaders view it as, I'm telling somebody they're not a good person. And that's not it. For me, it was always, this is a business conversation. I have to separate. And I think that's how I made it through HR for 20 plus years, is I have to separate the business from the human. And not that I am not empathetic or caring about difficult conversations, but it was a business conversation I was having. And so that's why transparency for me is like, look, here are the facts. I also think, and Lexi, you mentioned this, people can, and these are not the best places to get compensation information. You can use ChatGPT, you can use Google. And so employees are doing this and finding this, and they find these extraordinary ranges and these crazy numbers sometimes. And that creates a whole nother issue. And that's, I think, all of these things, along with, and Lexi, your comment about the last few years, like we're like getting to like it's going to be a decade at some point. Is it, are they unprecedented or precedented? My guess is the unprecedented stuff we're dealing with is really just precedented now because it's just the norm.
I think so too.
There's also no playbook for any of this. Like the COVID was the best example of HR leaders being thrust into roles where you have to make up what's going to happen on the fly with very little data. Now, the beauty of compensation is there's a ton of data. And you can take that data and shape it and be transparent and educate and help your managers with tools and data and facts for them to have really meaningful conversations with employees. Now, is every employee going to be happy with that? No. This is always the rub. And like, that's it. You're never going to please. I learned when I first became a CHRO, I was like, okay, like I'm never going to be able to please everybody ever again. Like, that's it. Like, there's always going to be somebody upset with something I do or say or decide or whatever the case may be. But I think it's all of what Lexi said and these other things that I just commented on that have come to this. Like, it's ahead now. It's like companies, in my opinion, should embrace pay transparency and do the work to get there because it makes things easier. But there is a big hump to get over to get there, and that can be daunting for a lot of CHROs, total rewards leaders. If you look at mid-sized companies, they might have a manager of compensation if they're lucky. It might be an HR director or a VP of HR doing that who's not a specialist in everything. They're a generalist and they understand enough to get this done. But this requires work and data and support from companies like PayScale that have the tools that can help organizations get through this.
Yeah. And pay transparency, you both talked about it, it's probably been like that, the biggest disruptor, and what is probably, coming back to why is compensation so hard? And there's two aspects to that. There's obviously being compliant with the legislation, having to put your house in order to be able to get yourself to a point of being able to be comfortably transparent about pay and post those pay ranges out there. The other aspect of that, you talked about the different employee generations, Paul, is this growing employee expectation around pay and a growing awareness. And belief in the importance of fair pay. I mean, I think that always existed, but I don't think employees ever felt as empowered as they do today to feel, that they should be paid fairly. And that was another fact that I wanted to share from CBPR, was that 47% of organizations felt they were stuck in a tough spot trying to balance pay equity with financial pressure. So let's dig into that. We've got economic volatility, uncertain labor markets. We are anticipating or seeing the trend of pay budgets coming down. We're out fielding our salary budget survey right now here at PayScale, waiting to see those metrics that we're closing out in a couple of weeks or in a week, I think, to see what we think the merit budget trend is going to be. But, we are not expecting generous pay budgets. How do you balance that with ensuring fair pay? Paul, do you want to kind of start us off there?
Yeah, I think, look, this is a challenge. When we did this at Indeed and we went through our pay equity annual process, we were lucky enough to have the cash to make the changes we needed to make and got to pay parity I think it was in the fall of 21. And that's not to say that it's over. You have to keep up on this and keep doing it because you still have humans making decisions. The more data, the better, but there's still subjective decisions going in here. I think the thing, if you uncover pay disparities, and I don't think the thing to do is not talk about them or hide them or push stuff under the carpet. I think, again, I believe I'm a big embracer of transparency. Get it all out there. Here's what we see. Here's what our pay equity report said. And this is a challenge in some companies because you've got legal talking about what you can and can't say or should and shouldn't say. And at the end of the day, you've got to push the envelope as far as you can as a CHRO or a total rewards leader. And then I think it's honest. It's like, look, here's the nut we have to crack. Here's the dollar amount that this should cost us. We can't get there today, this year. But here is our plan to get there, and we're going to continue to update this plan as we do more pay equity processes, as we look at that, and as budgets change, ebb and flow, as revenue changes. I think employees will understand. They may not like it, but it's all about the understanding of what's going on. We're not here, again, I said, CHROs, total rewards leaders, any executive, you're never going to be able to please everybody. So I think being clear about what's going on. You can also talk about, if we did this today, this is the impact it would have from an EBITDA perspective, a revenue perspective. We would then have to cut other costs by X. That might look like cutting jobs, cutting other things. And so at the end of the day, the most reasonable way to do this is to be honest about what's going on and have a plan and keep up with that plan. And this has always, to me, been the challenge with compensation. Compensation is an ongoing conversation, both at the employee level, the manager level, from an HR perspective, a leadership perspective, and a company perspective. And so this isn't okay, we did our pay equity exercise. Here's what this says. We'll come back to you in 12 months and update this. No, if you launch a new product and revenue takes off, let's talk about how much of that new revenue that we're going to appropriate to, closing the gap that we need to close. But this is an ongoing conversation. And I think leaders don't think about it in that way. It's like benefits, and it's this whole total rewards grouping gets lumped into this. Benefits are, we would talk about them all the time, but it's kind of like only when I need them do I need to know information about them. And I get that, but you also want to make sure people know what's available all the time because different things crop up at different things at times in our personal life or whatever's going on. I think compensation is the same thing. This is an ongoing conversation. This should be something that is talked about at an organizational level all the time. And if you're in this situation where, okay, let's say there's a $5 million check I need to write and I can't afford to do that. Here's the plan that we're going to put in place now. We're going to continuously update that plan and update our employees with what's going on, I think is the way to approach that. But it's tough. But I think if an employee leaves because you were honest and you couldn't afford it, then they probably shouldn't be there anyway.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I think honesty and transparency honesty has always been the best policy. I think transparency is the best policy too.
I think that's the kind of tactic when I've worked with large clients on pay equity is, they uncover the number and then it's creating that long-term plan of how you're going to get there. I mean, the comforting thing is that when we've done the analysis on this, and I think other consulting firms have done the analysis, that pay equity gap often only equates to being about 1% of payroll, which, it's just like, how do you prioritize that when you might have a tight merit budget and you've got some top talent that you need to keep? Like, how do you think about that, Lexi?
Yeah, I think that, to everything that Paul said, I think that the only other word I'd add is and I think it's somewhere in the middle, is authenticity. I think that employees are looking for, to everything that he shared, a real and authentic approach. People want to be told the truth. And it's one of the reasons why, I know we said we weren't going to talk about return to office on this, but it's one of the reasons why when companies are returning to the office, and the reason is, culture, employees are saying, well, that's not true. Just tell us that you signed a lease and you need to fill the space. We might not like it, but that feels like probably the truth and reality about where we are. And I think about that as a guiding principle also in terms of pay and compensation as well. We've been on this journey now 3 years. I think we started with, we had brought a bunch of companies together internally in 2021. We started to be transparent in 22. That was a forcing function for us to okay, we're transparent now. So we gotta clean it up and keep it clean. And we have the same questions everyone else has, right? Which is hey, inflation is X, but my merit increase is Y. Help me understand. I think that that authenticity and being really clear about the trade-offs is a really important part of the process. To what Paul said, they're not employees aren't always going to like it, but I think they're going to appreciate the trust and transparency. And we've used that, I think, as a guiding principle for us. I say this, a lot, Ruth, when you and I are on webinars, but the data, I think, is it truly will set you free from that perspective, because you can actually see what's going on in the market. Let's pull the data and actually look at the range for your role. Hey, I know that you saw this on social media, but maybe that's for one of the big tech companies that are paying in a different percentile. And oh, by the way, you can absolutely make the choice to go work there. You should know there are trade-offs culturally between where we are today and what that company has to offer. And that's not bad. That's a choice. And so I think, utilizing the data, we get questions a lot around hey, I'm a smaller organization. I can't pay in cash as much as someone else, but I feel really good about our benefits. Or how do I address that question when it comes up? And the reality is, I think people are just looking for the truth and the real kind of layout on what that looks like. And I think that starts with data. And we use our own data internally. We're very transparent around what data sources we pull in. We're transparent about, those conversations when it comes to ranges. We're also transparent about our journey. Ruth knows I use our pay transparency graphic or some of these things. And if anyone's ever seen a you are here map when you're trying to find something, that's what we've done in terms of our maturity and our journey, because that helps people really understand okay, I know where the company is and I can respond appropriately. And I would encourage, folks that are trying to kind of crack this nut, there is no perfect answer, but I think the truth and data are the truest ways to start the conversation. And, that's going to help you balance all the right things. The other thing I would say is to, exactly what Paul mentioned, especially as you're considering pay equity, sure, there are some decisions that happen, in a vacuum and all of a sudden you've got a pay equity issue, but a lot of that stuff is systemic and builds over time. So if you're doing a pay equity analysis for the first time and you've got a huge dollar number in front of you to go and fix it, maybe you have the funds to do that, but probably not from a company perspective. But what it's about is making a plan, working with your legal team to create and document the plan, right? And making those chunking or kind of chipping away at what that looks like and balancing that with, again, the financial pressure or the budget that you're under. We build and assume some version of market adjustments into our budget every single year. We bucket it under market adjustments because it could be that the market has moved, or it could be that we've got some internal inequity stuff that we want to go and fix. The assumption of building that into our budget every year has helped us to make sure we always have money for it. So we always have the dollars to make those adjustments. That's hard when you're working on a tight budget, but we've prioritized that as a big part of our philosophy, and we've been transparent with people about it. so that if folks have questions around like, hey, I sit next to this person and do a similar job, and I know that they make $5,000 more than I do, that we've got a really explainable reason why that may exist in the way that it does today, and or we build kind of budget and dollars in to account for those things. And some of that is, up to managers to make those final decisions. But so I think it's, I think, again, like that authenticity, but also like the grounding yourself in data as the first and foremost step in that process is the only way. And ground yourself in data that is, comparable to your own company, right? Like there's all kinds of things that get published in headlines around like this, massive company has made a change in their comp philosophy. You're probably not that massive company. We aren't. And so, you can always learn from those moments and learn kind of what they're doing. And it's good to do that, but you've got to put it in the context of which the business you run and the financial performance of your business. And so that's why, I always talk about being very, very close to your CFO and your finance team to really make sure that you're always speaking the same language.
Yeah. So we're going to pivot now to the reason why you do need to think about balancing fair pay with that budget reality check. And that's a reason that we see uncovered in some of our research, which is that turnover is heavily tied to the perception of pay inequity. In the CBPR report, 31% of organizations said employees were leaving because they think their pay isn't fair, even if it is. And we are just about to release an update to our Fair Pay Impact Report. It's a report that's been around for a while. It's often quoted. And we do some analysis in that report on, we ask people how they think they are paid to market. And then we ask them about their intention to leave their organization. And we see that most people, no one actually believes they're paid at the level, the level that they actually are. So even the people who are paid above market, there's a small percentage of them who don't believe they are. So, it's a human reaction. You never think you're paid enough. But we do see that as soon as that perception of not being paid fairly resonates, then there is a much higher intention for individuals to leave the organization. And I think one of you said the word trust. Let's talk about that. Trust and pay. What does that mean, Paul?
Well, the data doesn't lie. That's why transparency makes this conversation, this compensation process art, as I call it, because there's data, but there's subjectivity, and so it's an art. That's what makes it easier. Because you're right. If I believe, and you're right, that people always want to make more money, and they believe they're not paid fairly. But if you're showing them the data, and I think this is coupled, I think, Lexi, you alluded to this, industries are different, companies are different. Every company has some concept of a compensation philosophy. Tech is different than publishing, is different than manufacturing, is different than retail. But they should be able to talk about how they think about paying their employees. And then they can show the data and explain to employees why they fall. And this then gets coupled with performance in most cases, why they fall in whatever part of the range for their job that they fall in. And these are where these transparent conversations make this process easier. I think, when you're not as transparent about it, or there's no transparency, or similar to the last topic we were talking about, you do a pay equity study and you don't do anything with it, you lose trust, you lose authenticity. I think that's a great way to frame it. Lexi framed it well. It's like if you do something about it, and your employees are going to start to trust you, even though you're not going to close the gap right away. They're doing something about it that buys you and builds some trust. But at the end of the day, if it's opaque and I think I should be paid more, and I ask my manager about it, or I ask my HR business partner or total rewards leader or whomever about it, and I get these kind of vague answers, I'm like, okay, I think you're hiding something from me. I'm going to go, and I'm going to go look for another job. And that's an employee's choice. I think compensation typically comes back for years it has as a leading reason people leave. My guess is some of that is they just don't understand the company's philosophy, pay strategy, budget constraints, whatever it may be, because there's not been transparency about it. And so companies are losing people still to this day because of that lack of transparency and that lack of understanding. I think the other thing is, compensation requires education. To employees, to leaders, to senior leaders. I've had plenty of senior leaders that we've gone down paths of like, well, let's break this down. And there were these aha moments like, oh, I didn't realize that, or I didn't know that, or I didn't realize we used this survey for these jobs and this survey for these jobs. Or we had to, for obscure, like not CHR roles, but let's say there was a, quality profile checker or something, some random thing that's specific to a company. I'm going back to my Match.com days because there was a profile quality assurance person team, but that job is not clearly mapped to a survey data. And so then I have to choose a bunch of different jobs that are similar to it and weight them. And like that was an aha moment for a lot of executives at companies I've been the CHRO at in the past, because there are these jobs that are very specific to an industry. But I think education is to me, along with transparency, is a big linchpin to all of this, because people don't understand compensation and what goes into compensation. And to Lexi's comment, I may not have the biggest comp budget, but we really provide these amazing mental health benefits, and our medical plan is like top notch. We've got a strong PTO policy, whether it's unlimited or very strong, and we encourage people to take it. I think open PTO or unlimited PTO gets this bad rap because it's like, oh, companies' ways of getting rid of the financial responsibility, at least here in the States. And I think if you do it right, you're kind of encouraging and almost forcing people to take time off so that they don't burn out. And you can wrap, like, here's the experience of being an employee at this company. And we're not going to pay the highest, but I think being honest about that is important, because I think, similar to an earlier comment I made, I want to work someplace where I feel comfortable, where I am challenged. I feel like I'm getting compensated in the broad sense fairly, not just my paycheck, because that's not the only part of compensation, and that I have the ability to learn and develop, and I have friends at work. Like I still go back to Gallup's Q12 survey, which is an engagement survey that the Gallup organization has. One of their questions is, do you have a best friend at work? And that is a really big thing. And compensation is a part of that, but I think companies have to think more broadly about, it's not just your paycheck, and help explain that to employees. One of the things I remember, this goes back, and I'm not picking on any individual person at Indeed, but we, like a lot of tech companies, had free food. In the heyday, there was a lot of free food, and that budget line was in my budget, and it was a crazy number. We could have probably said a third world country for what we spent on food. And there was an employee that was in line, like getting food on whatever day it was, and an employee in front of me was complaining to the person next to them, not me, the person in front of them, about the selections. And I was like, hey, I'm Paul, this is what I do. Like, do you have any idea how much this costs our company? And so I gave them the number. He's like, you're joking. I'm like, it's in my budget. Like, that's the number, that's what this costs. And I said, I get, and this is where you can't please everybody. I get you may not like this offering or the selections that we have today, but please understand that we pay a lot of money, and we can't cover every type of food allergy or whatever the case may be. I think our employee experience teams did an amazing job, but and then the funny thing was, it got back to me that he was then telling other people, he's like, do you know this is how much we spend on this? And it was like in a good way. Oh my God. But it was that simple, here's a piece of information that you don't have that goes into making decisions about food, which is an inane thing. But and that, to me, is part of compensation, although that's a slippery slope when you start to talk about it, because then they start to add the dollars up. And if they don't get lunch one day, they want their $15 or whatever the case may be. But I think this education, I think sometimes we lose we lose the forest for the trees, because not everybody has the same understanding of compensation coming into their job. And I think that's such an important part of this entire conversation.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about pay transparency. We've talked about trust. Keep an eye out for that fair pay impact report. I mean, I know I talk to a lot of people, interact with a lot of people where they're saying, how do we build the business case for pay transparency? It's that understanding of the link between I always say the equation is, am I paid fairly? Yes, then I have trust, then I'm engaged, and then I'm productive kind of thing. So it's that like fair pay equation for me. Okay, I'm going to close this out. We've been looking at some of the numbers from the Compensation Best Practice Report. We're going to do something different. We're going to do a quick round of true or false. Paul and Lexi, are you paying
I have
attention?
test anxiety.
I feel like I didn't study, and I feel like I read it. Just it's been anyway. We'll see how I do.
So it depends. I'm going to test whether you stayed up all night last night and read the Compensation Best Practice Report or not. Okay, I'm going to give you a fact, and you have to tell me whether you think it is true or false.
Okay.
First fact: more than half of organisations are confident in their pay transparency strategy.
False.
I agree. I think false.
And you are both right.
Woo!
38. There's no prize here, can I just say?
Okay. Well,
Oh, I'll buy you a drink next time we're in the same city.
a Chardonnay, Ruth. A Chardonnay. I need a Chardonnay.
Okay. Only 38% feel confident in their pay transparency strategy. And I think that's probably for a lot of the reasons that we've talked about here today. The work to get there, the feeling confident, having managers who can talk confidently about it. So, okay. Next question. Nearly 1 in 3 employees believe their pay is fair. True or false?
So
1 in 3.
33% feel they're paid fairly. I'm going to say false.
I'm going to say true, mostly because I feel like it gets interesting when Paul and I are on it. Let's see. Gets interesting.
And it is false. Only 18% believe they're paid fair. I think that comes back to my, when we've done that research on no matter where you are, whether you're paid above market, at market, or below market, everyone thinks they're paid.
And let the record reflect that I wanted to be controversial. That's why I got it wrong.
Right.
I wanted to be controversial. Just
2-1 to Paul. Just saying. Okay. Last question. Is that whose dog is that? In the background.
It's mine. I'm sorry.
But you don't have dogs. You've got cats.
No,
yes.
no, I don't have dogs.
Lexi has cats. Paul has dogs. Okay, last question. 59% of organisations have trained their managers to talk about pay. True or false?
False.
Oh, true.
And you are right. So we ended up at 2-2. Yes. 59% of organisations have trained their managers to talk about pay. And that's been a number, as a metric that we've been tracking over the years. And not surprisingly, against the context of pay transparency, it's a number that's been growing in our CBPI study.
I'm pleased with that. That is amazing.
If I had gotten that wrong, I just did a webinar with that slide, Ruth. So you could have truly roasted me. You could have roasted me. Missed opportunity. Maybe the next one.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing your views today, and thank you for the audience for listening in. As a reminder, you can always get hold of our Compensation Best Practice Report at payscale.com. Keep an eye out for that Fair Pay Impact Report that is imminently going to be released. But thank you, Paul, and thank you, Lexi, for sharing your thoughts on the growing friction and why compensation is becoming so hard to manage in the workplace. If you've got any other thoughts or takeaways, share them on LinkedIn or tag us or drop us a note at coffee@payscale.com. And we'd love to hear from you. And we might even feature your response in a future episode. So huge thanks again, Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And Lexi, you too.
Thank you for allowing me to return. And hopefully I'll be asked back again.
All right. Thank you very much, both of you. Goodbye.